Thank you to PaperLike for sponsoring this video. Check out the links in the description to find out how you can make writing on your iPad feel like you're writing on paper. Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and the iPad Air 3 or iPad Air 2019, whatever you want to call it, has been out for a little bit over a month now. So I thought now would be a great time to come back and revisit this device and see how it's holding up 1 month later. So the iPad Air 3 is a very similar form factor. It's one that we're very used to because it's the same as the 2017 iPad Pro. It has a 10.5-inch LCD display, even the same body and form factor of that 2017 iPad Pro with the same thickness and also the same weight, weighing a little bit over a pound. It also has the Lightning port and Touch ID sensor, not opting to go for the USB-C connector or the Face ID sensor that is found on the 2018 iPad Pro. This is the 64GB model of the iPad Air, which retails for $499. Now, when I said this iPad Air had the same form factor as the 2017 iPad Pro, I did leave out two things. The first being is that the iPad Air has a lower resolution and a weaker camera than the 2017 iPad Pro, opting for a 8-megapixel sensor as opposed to the Pro's 12-megapixel sensor. It also drops the optical image stabilization that was found in the 2017 Pro. This camera change also impacts the design of the iPad Air because unlike the iPad Pro, it doesn't have a camera bump on the back, meaning that it lays flat down on a table and just has a more pleasing design aesthetic because of the lack of the camera bump. The camera's performance isn't going to measure up with modern day flagship smartphones, but you can still get a couple of good snapshots, especially in a good lighting situation, but this camera does perform really weakly if you're using it in any low light scenario, but again, it's still perfectly fine if you're just taking a few quick snapshots or if you're doing something like scanning a receipt. Thankfully, the camera on the front opts for a 7-megapixel front-facing camera, which is the equivalent of modern-day flagships in both the iPhone and in the 2018 iPad Pro. So your selfies will look really clear on the iPad Air if you're into that, but most importantly, if you're doing any sort of FaceTime calls, it should be crystal clear. Now, the second design change for the iPad Air comes down to the speakers. Now, the 2017 iPad Pro had 4 speakers, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, and they would change the sound positioning based on how you held the device. And the iPad Pro really elevated the quality of the speakers for Apple's tablet line, producing a richer, fuller sound from the 4 speakers in each corner of the device. And the iPad Pro speakers since the beginning has always been something that has impressed me, especially for a tablet. Well, that's not the case on the 2019 iPad Air because the speaker reverts back to the old design with just 2 bottom-firing speakers. After a month of using the iPad Air and especially switching back between the 2018 iPad Pro and then the 2019 iPad Air, I would say that this is one of the weakest points of the 2019 iPad Air. The iPad Air speakers aren't horrible, and it generally works okay if you're watching content on YouTube or listening to a podcast, but it does lose the immersiveness and louder sound when watching movies or listening to music. However, unlike the 2018 iPad Pro, the 2019 iPad Air retains the headphone jack, so if you do have a good pair of quality headphones, you can hook that up easily to the iPad Air and then get much better sound than either the 2017 or 2018 iPad Pro. The iPad Air also retains the bezels of the older iPad design, and even though the 2018 iPad Pro has a nicer design, it's really one of those things that doesn't impact usability. Because it still weighs about a pound, the iPad Air is a super portable device, and it's very easy to hold in one hand while you're walking around the house, and just a very lightweight device. You can pack it and bring it with you anywhere, and that is one of the key strengths to the iPad, is its versatility and its lightness. The Air's display has a resolution of 2048 by 1536 for 264 pixels per inch. So basically the same Retina iPad experience we've been getting a while in terms of resolution. The display is also laminated and retains the P3 wide color gamut support, and also supports the True Tone display, which changes the lighting of the screen depending on the ambient lighting around you. And I don't think Apple gets enough credit for True Tone. I'm sure there's some people out there that don't like it, but every time I go back to a screen without the True Tone display, it really does look overly blue, and I really do appreciate the warmer tones, especially when I'm reading content. Overall, I like the display on the 10.5-inch iPad Air. I find it's a nice middle ground between the 9.7 of the older iPad designs and then the 12.9 of the bigger iPad Pro. It's a size that makes it really easy to carry around, but also a big enough screen where you can do multitasking on the device. And all of your content from photos to videos to browsing websites, reading magazines, all looks really great on this display. Now, the key difference with the iPad Airs and the iPad Pros is that this iPad Air does not support the Pro Motion Display. The Pro Motion Display runs at 120 Hz and this iPad Air runs at 60 Hz. So basically, this is one of the things that was harder for me to go back to coming from a 2018 iPad Pro. I really do like the way that the Pro Motion Display looks, especially when scrolling or going through my apps, or when using the new gestures on the iPad Pro. I really like how the animations look on the 120 Hz display. And even though apps aren't technically loading faster because of the Pro Motion Display, I find that it makes the whole experience feel snappier and smoother. However, if you're not used to a Pro Motion Display, or if you're coming from a more casual perspective, I don't really think it's going to impact you that much. And even myself, someone who is used to that Pro Motion Display, if I'm using the iPad Air for a while, I do tend to forget about it. But immediately when I switch back to my iPad Pro, I go, okay, that is a nice thing to have. Another impact with the iPad Air's Pro Motion, though, is that it will also revert you to the old latency of the Apple Pencil. So the new iPad Pro support an Apple Pencil with 20 milliseconds. Going to the iPad Air will revert you back to the original Pro's 40 milliseconds of latency. Speaking of reverting back, the iPad Air 3 also doesn't get to use the fancy new second generation Apple Pencil, which charges magnetically on the side. It goes back to the first generation of Apple Pencil where you have to charge it via the Lightning port. This is another big step back coming from a 2018 iPad Pro. I really do like the design of the second generation of Apple Pencil. I like how you can store it on the iPad Pro, and I like how it charges magnetically through that. That being said, although I prefer the way that the second generation pencil works and the way it feels, the first generation of Apple Pencil is still an impressive piece of technology. After 1 month, it still works great. Writing on the screen, drawing, marking up, or editing photos works great, even with the 40 milliseconds of latency on the non-Pro Motion display. And for a 10.5-inch display with an input as good as the Apple Pencil, this is going to make a great creative device at an affordable price of only $499. The Apple Pencil might not be for everyone, but it enables you to get more precise control that goes beyond taking notes. And if you want to get even more control out of your Apple Pencil, make sure you check out our sponsor for this video, PaperLike. PaperLike is a screen protector that makes your iPad feel like you're writing on actual paper. Seriously, as soon as you put the tip of your Apple Pencil down on your iPad, you get a much more textured experience that actually sounds like you're writing on paper. It's really quite unbelievable. The textured feel on the PaperLike screen protector gives you so much more control, whether you're writing, sketching, drawing, anything you're doing with your Apple Pencil just feels so much better. And I'm no artist, so I invited one to draw something quick for this video, and as soon as they felt the PaperLike screen, they immediately wanted one. And even if you're not an artist, or even if you don't use the Apple Pencil, if you want a more matte finish to your iPad screen, I really like the PaperLike screen protector, and it even gets rid of my problem with the iPads, and that would be the fingerprint magnets that these are. PaperLike really doesn't show fingerprints. PaperLike ships worldwide, and it works on any iPad, so even if you don't own the iPad Air 3, if you own the new iPad mini or an older iPad Pro, you can still get a PaperLike screen protector. So make sure you check out the link in the description to find out how you can make your iPad feel more like writing on paper, and thank you so much to PaperLike for sponsoring this video. Another great addition to the affordable iPad Air is the addition of Apple's Smart Keyboard. Now, this is the same Smart Keyboard as the 2017 iPad Pro, even down to when I ordered the Smart Keyboard, it came in an iPad Pro box. Honestly, I've always been a fan of the Smart Keyboards. I've never minded the shallow typing experience. I've always liked the keys on them. And I like how lightweight they are and how easily it is to detach the iPad from it, so you can easily switch from tablet mode to laptop mode. Also, other things like the iPad Air has spill-proof keys, which when reviewing the iPad Air, I did spill some coffee on the keyboard, but thankfully it was fine. And we don't need to spend too long on the Smart Keyboard, other than I think it's a really smart decision that Apple has been moving these Pro features down the line. Now you have an affordable iPad, and if you want to attach a physical keyboard to it, you don't have the barrier of having to go to the more expensive Pro models anymore. Okay, so let's talk about specs on the iPad Air. I don't want to spend too long on it, but the iPad Air, one of the great things about it is that it is a very capable device in terms of the chipset. So Apple is giving you the A12 processor, the same one that's found on the iPhone XS and the iPhone XR. On Geekbench, this gives you a single core score of 4,814 and a multi-core score of 11,319. And to put that into perspective, this iPad Air is more powerful than the $1,200 MacBook Air and even more powerful than the entry-level MacBook Pro. And to make it short, this iPad Air can handle anything you throw at it. Over the month that I've been using it, I never ran into really any slowdowns, whether that's playing a game like Fortnite, which you can play at full graphics in 60 frames per second, or whether I'm using an app like Affinity Photo to edit my photos, even putting up video in LumaFusion, which granted I don't really edit too much on my iPad, I didn't find any bottlenecks or slowdowns in this experience. And all while keeping that gold standard of 10 hours of battery life on the iPad Air. And after the month I've been using it, it's been really hard to tell the difference between the A12 chip on the iPad Air and the A12X chip on the iPad Pro. And even though the iPad Air has 3 gigabytes of RAM versus the iPad Pro's 4 gigabytes of RAM, I haven't noticed any apps closing down in the background more frequently. I'm sure maybe there might be some of that happening, but from a user perspective, from a day-to-day perspective, I'm not noticing a bunch of app refreshes. As for iOS 12, it runs great on the device, and you get all of the same features you would find on the more expensive iPad Pro, which means you get things like the dock, you get things like multitasking, picture-in-picture, drag and drop. And while a lot of pros complain about the software limitations that is found on a device like an iPad Pro, where maybe you're spending upwards of $1,000, it might not be as easy to make those arguments when you're coming into a territory of $499 at the starting price. This is more comparable to something like a cheaper Chromebook, and this iPad Air is a lot more capable than a device like that. And it's also great that the iPad Air has room for expandability. Let's run through a scenario. You want a good tablet, so you purchase an iPad Air. 6 months later, you realize you want to get a keyboard and you use your iPad as a laptop alternative. Or you might decide to pick up an Apple Pencil for writing, drawing, or photo editing. It's this kind of flexibility and versatility combined with a reasonable price that's going to make this iPad Air a very attractive tablet for most of the consumers out there. So, after a month of use, do I recommend purchasing the iPad Air? Absolutely. The iPad Air is a fantastic tablet and a great laptop alternative with very minimal compromises, and I don't think you should be upgrading to the iPad Pro unless you really know you need that extra power or the second generation Apple Pencil, or you want the best possible tablet out there. But for $499, you're basically getting all of the iPad Pro features in a much more affordable tablet and a really good tablet. Alright everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure you give me a like. If you want to see more from my channel, make sure you subscribe. If you want to support the channel in any way, make sure you check out some of the links in the description. I'll have a link to the Greg's Gadgets merch store, as well as a link to purchase the iPad Air. And as always, I will see you all in the next video. Take care everyone. Thank you to PaperLike for sponsoring this video. Check out the links in the description to find out how you can make writing on your iPad feel like you're writing on paper.